It's my turn? Before I came to La Cemetery, I took a short trip. This incident took place during that trip. It was a spring night. I could no longer suppress my fatigue, so I stayed at a farmer's house by the roadside. It was in a remote village far away from the city, but the master of the house was very hospitable. He cooked me dinner and told me that I had come at a bad time. As you know, few people are willing to let someone like me lodge with them, and compared to my perpetual misfortune, this situation is hardly worth mentioning. However, on the following day, as I prepared to leave, I was informed that I needed to stay in the village for a few more days. The man told me that the village was founded and managed by a group of well-respected elders. As the situation had become more serious on the day I arrived, the elders decided not to let anyone leave. And so I went on living in this village, listening to the constant cries and wails from outside the house. However, a few days later, I heard the sound of nails being hammered into boards nearby in the middle of the night. "Is someone building a house out there?" I asked. The master of the house did not answer me, but instead made desperate prayers. Candles burned in the room. Their yellow light leapt and danced across the darkness. I could vaguely hear him asking God for forgiveness. The sound of hammering lasted 2 days. On the third day, everything went quiet. I peeped through the window and found that a small wooden house had been built in the open space near us. Strangely enough, the hut was quiet at first, then became rowdy every few days, and then blared with howling and desperate cursing a few days later. After a while, the hut became quiet again. This cycle continued. At night, the awful sound resembled a dark incantation, cursing life itself. I don't know why, but I always felt as though venomous eyes glared forth from within that hut. "Your head is playing tricks on you. Just close the curtains." When I mentioned this to my host, he uttered these words and shook his head. But I knew that he had been praying for longer and longer each day. That was until one night. A strong, burning smell filled my nostrils. I opened my eyes and found that the man had disappeared, and a fire was consuming the nearby hut. It had almost reached the house I was staying at. Finally, the epidemic subsided, and I was allowed to leave the village. Before I left, I was invited to attend a sermon at the village church. I saw the walls of my former lodging blackened by the fire, and the poor little hut nearby. All that remained of it was a charred frame. This was the wrath of God. That day, the village elders stood in the middle of the church. The elders looked coldly at me. God's forgiveness comes only when the sinners are punished. All our misfortunes, or their misfortunes, are due to His providence. I didn't know what that meant until I went back to my host's house. After I had packed up my things and was ready to leave, I found that beside the ruins of the hut stood a wooden sign with something written on it. One barely legible word could be seen. Ward.